Hi, I'm Greg Berninger, Ghent Town historian. In today's trip into Ghent history, we're spending some time in the Chatham Rural Cemetery here in the town of Ghent, in the village of Chatham. And I'm here today to convince you of one thing, and that is to use this cemetery. Yeah, I'm not here to try to sell you a plot. This is not an infomercial, though I can hook you up if you need one. I want you to use this cemetery while you are alive. I want you to use it for the purpose that rural cemeteries were built. The rural cemetery movement starts in the 1830s. The first and still the greatest, most beautiful one is called Mount Auburn Cemetery, and it's just outside of Boston. And they became very popular throughout the 19th century and early 20th century. This cemetery in Chatham was chartered in 1856, so it actually predates the village of Chatham's existence by 13 years. And I want to talk about why these came to be, why rural cemeteries became a thing, and what historical moment they came out of in the country, and also what historical moment this one came out of in Ghent/Village of Chatham, New York. And it's very interesting window on the past, and I think you'll find it to be an interesting window on our present as well. So let's start with the name, Rural Cemetery. Rural is a little bit of a misnomer. Rural cemeteries were in fact not rural. They were built to have a lot of natural elements. I'm surrounded by beautiful cedar trees. There's a beautiful sycamore up there. And of course, at the opening of this video, we were looking down at the pond here in the corner of this cemetery. So they were not necessarily rural. They were not out in the countryside. They would be just outside settled areas, and they would be built to reflect and to incorporate nature. That alone tells us something about the time period. European Americans in the 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s, they hated nature. Nature was the biggest nuisance they had, right? Imagine trying to, you built your house out of wood, and there's no pressure treated, there's no vinyl siding, and you're trying to keep that from rotting in nature. You're a farmer with very limited technology, a barely functional plow, and you are trying to clear land and grow crops. It was very challenging. So the best you got out of nature was hunting and fishing for food. But if you're interested in agriculture, nature was a thorn in your side in the 16, 17, early 1800s. But by the mid 1800s, nature is becoming, farmer technology is advancing, figured out how to ditch fields much better, and there's even some horse-drawn equipment to use. So Americans are starting to sort of embrace nature a little bit more. And cities, of course, are growing by leaps and bounds. And if you live in a city, you're really missing nature. So to have this little spot of nature just outside your settled area was really a remarkable thing, and people visited often. People picnicked. People spent a tremendous amount of their spare time, what little they had, they would come to their local rural cemetery. Also, just as a practical matter, you needed place to bury people for proper hygiene. So as cities and towns and hamlets developed, you couldn't have the family plot. There are family cemeteries all over Ghent. Some of them, the stones are still there. Some of them, the stones have been tossed a long time ago and the bodies are still there, but somebody's plowing over them or the trees have grown back. There are little family farm cemeteries all over Ghent. And of course you can't have those if you live in the village of Chatham or the city of Boston or New York City. And also the little church graveyard, that also was they were all getting filled up, and churches were in settled areas, and they had their limits. The cemetery has a very different vibe than a graveyard. Just the sound of it, graveyard. Really old stones have skulls and bones. They're kind of scary, those really old gravestones. Stones in here are quite beautiful to look at, right? They're not really scary at all. So we're moving away from graveyards and getting interested in cemeteries. The cemetery, that word was first used in the 1830s, and it's actually Greek for sleeping place. And I guess like now, right, people are always interested in, you know, zombie shows and movies, and, you know, on TV people are always getting killed. It's a different type of fascination with death we have now, I think. But in the mid-1800s, people were very interested in what were called liminal spaces. What happened to us after we died, right? What happened to us after we died? And a cemetery is a great place to think about that. Additionally, this response to industrialism is going on in America. So as nature is being dominated, dug up, pumped out of the ground, factories are growing, people wanted to get away from that. People actually wanted to escape and use nature not necessarily as a place to grow crops, but as a place to go and to spend time to get away from industrialism. So two very significant changes in the American landscape. And of course, what better place? This cemetery, this Chatham Rural Cemetery, is the epitome. It is a perfect example of a small town rural cemetery. It's on a hillside, it's just outside a settled area, and just on the other side of this hill, right, is the Chatham Rail Yard. Not as big as it used to be, of course, but 5 train lines used to come into Chatham. You've heard me say this before. 90 at its peak, 90 trains a day, hooting, smoking, coal, steam, belching out of them. A day passed through the village of Chatham. And just on the other side of that industrial hubbub, this beautiful escape into nature. Now, I told you a minute ago my goal here is to get you to come here, but hey, we don't have really much trains to escape. It's actually kind of nice when a train rolls through Chatham now. You go, oh look, a train. But we still have plenty to escape, right? We don't live in the industrial age anymore in Chatham or in America, right? The industrial age is over. We live in the digital age. The digital age needs escaping from just as much as the industrial age needed escape from. It is rare for people to take a moment and to do nothing except let their mind reset. People whip out their phones like they're in a standoff in a Western movie to always see what's going on. It's very rare to see someone just sitting and looking out and doing nothing. In fact, people think it's strange if you do that. Trust me, I do it frequently. When you visit the cemetery, leave the phone home. Leave anything that involves electricity home. And when you come here, what I want you to do, I want you to just sit and not think about anything. I want you to sit and see what your mind and heart and body feels like when you are around the people who came through Chatham and Ghent before you in this beautiful, peaceful, quiet place, and see how you feel. One of the best books that has a little bit about rural cemeteries is coincidentally Gary Wills's fantastic book about the Gettysburg Address. And of course, behind me is the dais and the cemetery building where most of you watching this have heard Chatham High School students read the Gettysburg Address every year since, I don't know how long it's been going on here, but I've certainly heard it many times. But the book that Wills wrote, he gets into a little bit more than the Gettysburg Address, and he gets into 19th century Americans' relationship with death. And I'm going to read a little bit of you, but before we do that, let's take a walk up to the cemetery building and get a little different perspective on things. So we moved up to the dais next to the beautiful building in the middle of the Chatham Rural Cemetery. And I was mentioning before Gary Wills's book about Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address, which has a great passage about 19th century Americans. Again, 1856 this cemetery was founded, and their relationship with death and how that connects with the cemeteries. The cemetery was the supreme locus of liminality in the 19th century. It was the borderland between life and death, time and eternity, past and future. Justice Joseph Story was part of the dedication ceremony for Mount Auburn, the first American rural cemetery. Quote, "We return to the world, and we feel ourselves purer and better and wiser from this communion with the dead." I could make up a lot of reasons why I think that is, and that would be interesting speculation. I'm sure you could do the same. Test Mr. Story, Justice Story's thesis. Come here, leave your phone home, disconnect, and sit here on the dais. I don't think there's a more beautiful place in the county to sit and spend some time and let your mind wander, muse, and take a break. Take a break from the world and spend some time with the people who came before you. And if you think about it, this is one of the reasons I and you love local history, because it is communing with the people who are right here in our town before us, right? People we're connected to in a very intimate way, people who walked right in front of you only 20 or 100 years ago. And you know that feels good. You know that it is good for you. On a practical level, after spending time in a cemetery and thinking about life and death and eternity, you're far less likely to get upset about the person who spends a few more seconds in front of you after the light turns green. Or if you go to the Bartlett house at 10 o'clock on Friday and they're out of your favorite rye bread already. It just doesn't bother you much when you've spent time in a cemetery and you are connected to the cosmos of your world. So please do so. Come here, spend some time, enjoy it, check in with me, right? Let me know what your experience was like. In future videos, we are going to visit with some of the people who lie in eternal repose here at the Chatham Rural Cemetery, and you can visit with them yourself when you stop by. Thanks for coming along with me on this trip into Ghent history, and I will see you in the cemetery.